Right here we have a 2001 Volkswagen Jetta Wolfsburg with a 1.8T engine. Customer bought it in non-running condition, and the previous owner described a harness problem. All I know is what I see under the hood, and it's a disaster. Let me show you what we found. Here's what we have. It's in disassembled condition. The harness for the engine computer, it travels along here and goes to the coil packs and various other things, is just laying here. Not installed at all. Looks like it's got some new coil packs on it. The red coil packs with urotuning adapters to hold those red coil packs in there. I guess the reasoning behind the red coil packs is they last better than the 1.8T coils do. I don't know if that's true or not, but this is what we have to deal with here. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, why did they repair this harness? Now, I would assume they had a misfire probably, because these coil packs were on here. I don't know if they put spark plugs in there or not. I'm not sure. But this harness here, these have a tendency to crack. The insulation cracks all around here. And so they've either bought a new harness, which I don't think new harnesses are available, or they've bought these individually, which these are available, and wired them in. Now, I'm not sure about that because the wire colors, usually when you get a replacement harness, the wire colors are not selective towards each cylinder. They're just all one color. So I don't know what's going on here. Maybe he found a new old stock new harness and put it on here, but this is what we're dealing with. We're going to have to get the customer's okay to reinstall this harness and then do a diagnosis based on what it needs from there. I also wanted to mention that this, when we received this car, did not have a battery. Our customer brought in a Never Start from Walmart. Not my favorite battery. And we have went ahead and plugged in the coils and plugged in everything that we could find. Routing isn't permanent right now, but we've got it hooked to the computer and plugged in and everything, and we're trying to start it and see what happens. Well, started. Check engine lights flashing. So it's obviously got a misfire. Doesn't sound real good. I don't know whether it's got a muffler or a catalytic converter on it or not, but I don't know how well you can see that in the camera, but it's shaking like a poodle crap in a peach pit. So we're going to scan the engine computer. So we have random misfire and cylinder number 3 and cylinder number 2 misfire. (15 and 16 are where we see our misfires at on BagCom. Seems to be not showing. Oh, seems to be showing some misfires on cylinder 2 and 3. Check engine light did stop flashing. I don't know if you can see that or not. Turn the dash on. You can rev it up some. Since we had misfires on number 2 and number 3, I think I'll go ahead and unplug these and see if it affects the way it runs any. I don't see any effect at all on that. So that cylinder's not contributing at all. That one doesn't seem to be contributing at all. I assume since this car is running, the other two cylinders have to be. Yeah, that one definitely affects it. That one definitely affects it. So we have misfire on number 2 and 3. Obviously, by unplugging these, we've probably triggered coil circuit codes, but we'll ignore those. So the data stream is showing these two cylinders misfiring. Doesn't seem to be going up as fast as I was expected to, because those two cylinders aren't contributing at all. Maybe there's some type of complication with both of them misfiring that bad. It's not counting it right. It doesn't matter, but they're definitely misfiring. The cylinder contribution test showed no contribution at all on either one. Those two are definitely misfiring. But why? Okay, so I came up with a theory. I have spent a significant amount of time on this, mainly just thinking about it and looking things up. But I come up with a theory. Since this was wired in, maybe they wired this circuit to that circuit on accident and that circuit to that circuit on accident. So I thought about methods of checking that and scoping and stuff like that. But I think the easiest thing to do here would be just to flip it around. So this one doesn't really reach. I can plug it in if I stretch it, but obviously that wasn't meant to be that way. Obviously the way they've wired it and taped this up, that obviously isn't right. It's supposed to be the other way. But I'm going to at least try this and see if it clears up the misfires. Definitely seems like it runs a little better. Let's see what VACCOM shows here. This time it's showing a lot of misfires on cylinder number 2, but none on number 3. We'll watch this for a while and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and clear codes and let this... Yeah, I've triggered ignition coil circuits and stuff by unplugging those, but we'll clear that. We'll go back in a minute and see what it shows, but we'll look at 15 and 16. And obviously cylinder number 2 is going up consistently, and cylinder number 3 is doing nothing. So that would lead me to believe that those two were wired in incorrectly. But why are we still misfiring? Probably swap some coils around just to eliminate that as a possibility. Take a quick look at the spark plugs. Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay, I've swapped the coils and took a look at the spark plugs. Although they were pretty nasty, I did swap them with good running cylinders. I swapped them with number 1 and it didn't change anything. We still have a misfire on number 2. I haven't seen any misfires on number 3 since I plugged those coils in the opposite way. So I think we'll do a compression test on that number 2. Probably should have done that while the spark plug was out, but we'll do a compression test on that number 2 and see where it goes from there. Okay, I had Courtland install the compression gauge on this, and we're going to crank the engine and see what it does. Can you go crank that for me?
All right.
Alright. And that went right up to 150. There's no compression problem with that cylinder. So I guess the next step would be to do some voltage checks here, or maybe put a scope on it.
Why don't we just take the coil pack out and put a spark plug in it and visually check for spark, see if it's working.
Yeah, we probably should have done that before we put the before we did compression test. Let's see. Yeah, if you'll do that for me, I'll come back over and video when you get that ready.
All right.
Okay, Courtland has a spark plug installed in that. We tried a spark plug tester, but this thing is fairly deep right here, and our spark plug tester doesn't reach in deep enough. So we're just going to have a spark plug in there. Go ahead and crank it, and we'll see what happens. Might turn this light off. Okay, go ahead and crank it. Don't see any. That's good. Hang on just a second. Let me try this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug it from this connector and plug it into this one and see if it sparks then. Okay, crank it. Okay, hang on. Let's go back to the other one more time to see if it... Okay, crank it. Thank you. There's definitely no spark there. That was a good idea that you had there. I should have thought of that first. Okay, so I guess to move forward we'll need to do some scope checking or voltage checking at the control wire of these coil packs to make sure the computer is commanding a ground. I would guess that since this harness was fabricated or wired in or whatever they did to it, that maybe they wired it incorrectly and so the number 2 is not firing. A scope check would probably be the quickest way to determine that we have a control to this coil. We'll take a known good. So I'm going to have you do this, Courtland. I want you to hook a scope to the number 1 to the control wire and get a known good pattern for the number 1 control wire, and then we'll switch to the number 2. You'll probably have to print a wiring schematic to know which wire to hook to, and we'll switch to the number 2 and see if we have a control pattern on the number 2.
Right,
and in the meantime we'll check powers and grounds on it also. We'll probably do that with the scope after we're checking the control wire. So if you can get the scope out and print a schematic if you need to. Go. Okay, Courtland has back probed the control wire to the number 1 solenoid to get a known good pattern for the control from the computer. And we have the pico scope hooked up here. And what are you seeing there, Courtland?
Well, I'm seeing a square wave, which means the computer's telling the cylinder number 1 to fire.
Okay. It'd be nice to have more of them on the screen there. Can you change the settings on the scope?
Yeah, I think I can do that. This one. Change the time.
Okay, so now we're seeing... Okay, I'm seeing something here, can you pause that for me? And obviously this is the number 1 because we're only hooked into the number 1. So this is our number 1 and this is our number 1, and that's a good control from the computer. But I'm seeing these patterns down here, and for some reason it's equally spaced except there's nothing here. So this is our inductive spike or our flyback voltage from the coil, from the magnetic field collapsing. That shows us that the spark is actually happening. And so if we go based on our firing order, that would be number 1, 3, 4,
And then 2.
and then 2. That's exactly right. So we have 1342, but there's no spark on number 2. So let's go ahead and switch our back probe to the number 2 cylinder to see if there's a control signal there. Go ahead and do that, and I'll awfully long back probe you got there. Might work. And let me unpause this here. Okay, so here is our number 2 cylinder. I'm going to go back here one more time. That's on the control wire from the number 2. And we really don't have, pause it. We really don't have a control from the computer there. There is a, I don't know what to call that, a blip, yeah. A blip there, but there's no inductive spike. And so we do have inductive spikes that we're still picking up on that one. So if that's 2, that would make that 1342. So we definitely don't have control from the computer. Now I find this blip interesting because we are very concerned that the wires were routed improperly because the guy wired this in. If the wires were routed improperly, there wouldn't be a blip. It would just be nothing. If it was hooked to ground, it would be ground. If it was hooked to power, it'd be power. So I find that interesting. I think we have a bad computer here because that blip is there. That blip is the computer trying to make a control on that on that coil, but it's not capable. So we'll do some ohm checking, and I suppose we should probably check the powers and grounds on this wire here, and then we'll do some ohm checking and maybe even jump a load onto the control wire, make sure it'll carry a load. But this looks like a bad computer. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is just pull this out of here and back probe at the computer on that brown wire. This one, the control wire on this one's brown. So we'll back probe there, and if we see the same pattern like this, then with this little blurb here, then we'll know that the wire is good. We'll probably go ahead and do some ohm checking just to be sure, but I'm about 90% sure right now we need a computer on this. Go ahead and back probe that, Courtland, and I'll watch the pattern. We are back probed on the computer, and we have that same little blip. I'm pretty confident this is going to need a computer. We're going to do some ohm checking, and obviously I think we need to check powers on this coil. We'll do a few more checks, and I'll call the customer and recommend a computer. Ladies and gentlemen, our salvage yard computer has arrived. The numbers match exactly to the original one. We do just have that sitting here. The original one's still down there. We haven't actually replaced it, but we are going to fire this baby up and see if it fixed our misfire on the number 2. Now, I just want to reinforce that we still have these flopped around. Courtland, can you start this? We have VADCOM hooked right there, but hopefully we can tell by the way it runs also. Does not seem to run perfect. Can you give it a little gas? Yeah, it seemed like it smoothed out mostly. I hope so anyway. We have been doing a lot of stuff here, so I'm going to go ahead and go in here and clear the codes. We had the computer unplugged and the coils unplugged, and so we'll go to measuring blocks 15 and 16 to see if there's any misfires. And as you see there with the new computer, our number 2 cylinder is not misfiring. Now, if you know, this computer has an immobilizer on it, and you may be asking yourself, how are you getting this car to run with this used computer on here when we know the immobilizer is programmed to the other car? And that will be the subject of another video. But right now, based on this right here, I think our car is fixed. We will need to do a little bit of wiring to get these to where it reaches conveniently, because this doesn't reach real well. I guess it don't reach that bad, but I really had to stretch it to get it over there the first time. Maybe it's moved around a little bit more now and it fits better, but we'll probably wire that in better, cover that up, pretty it up. We'll have to mount this wiring harness because a lot of it's still just laying here. The battery doesn't have a battery tray in it, it's just hanging there. In other words, it's a classic 1AT car. The CC or the crankcase vent here routed from the PVC. I don't even know where that stuff is. The car's still a mess, but we definitely got the misfire taken care of. Another fixed car. We are not done with this car entirely, but we are done with the diagnostic process. It wasn't a tough diagnosis, but it was kind of interesting for us because we fix misfires all the time. Coil packs go bad and we change coil packs. Misfires are easy, but very rarely do we have a computer that's not firing a coil pack causing a misfire. This, of course, was complicated by the wiring issue that it had. Courtland was involved in the diagnostic process, and he's learning and doing a great job of it. So I want to have him review the diagnostic process with us.
Yeah, so we had this car come in, pop the hood, and notice that the entire engine harness was disconnected. So we plugged everything in the appropriate spot where it should go and ran the car. It ran rough, so we hooked up the computer and VAGCOM to it and checked the misfire counters and noticed that cylinder number 2 and number 3 had misfires on it. And we took a look back at the engine, and Richard came to the conclusion that possibly the number 2 and number 3 coil pack connectors were wired in opposite. We did not plug it in wrong because we plugged everything in the appropriate spot where everything sat naturally. So we decided to switch those to see what would happen.
I just want to clarify here, what he's saying is the length of the wires was very appropriate for the number 2 coil to be plugged in where it was, and the number 3 coil to be plugged in where it was. So we did not flip them in backwards. They were very clearly wired in sequence, and the length was appropriate. Now, when I was able to plug them in the opposite way, but I did have to stretch that number 3 quite a bit to make it plug into the number 2. So go ahead.
And after we did that, we noticed an immediate difference. Still ran rough, but a better performance, and we plugged in the computer still and noticed that the misfire number 3 actually went away. And so now we had to figure out why the number 2 was misfiring. We checked for fuel, checked compression, and swapped the coil packs to see if that made any difference, which it didn't. So then we decided to visually check for spark by pulling out the coil pack with the spark plug in it. Did not notice a spark. Switched that spark to a known good coil pack and did see a spark, which told us that the computer was not commanding spark to that coil.
Well, that was just a theory at that point.
Yes. So then we got the scope and hooked it up to the control wire on a known good coil, the number 1 coil, and looked at for a square wave and got a good clean square wave. So then we decided to do the same test on the number 2 coil and did not get a clean square wave. We got a little blip instead. So then we did the same test on the computer side of the control wire and got the same blip, which helped us deduce that this car probably needed a new ECU.
Excellent description, Courtland. And of course, we did a few power and ground checks at the coil. I also wanted to mention that we did see an inductive spike. Our diagnosis probably would have been much quicker if we'd have got the scope out earlier and just scoped that control wire, because we wouldn't have needed to check for spark because we could see that inductive spike. And that probably would have been the best and quickest diagnosis. Of course, complicated, of course, by the fact that the car came in with the harness not even installed. But so what do you think caused the computer to fail?
Well, I think some DIY mechanic decided to do the wiring himself.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
It was a fun challenge. This was a fun one. Learned a lot. Learned a lot about scoping and checking for data. And That was a good one.
Yep. It was fun for me too. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And if you would like to contribute to the continued production of these videos, find my website at www.kansascitytdi.com, and you can find the link there that says donate. Thanks for watching. Of course, now we're still going to have to figure out what to do with these crankcase vent components right here. I don't even know where the PVC stuff is. Oh my God, there ain't even anything in the top of the crankcase there. Oh, good grief.
Yep, typical 1.8T.